Hey Guy, welcome back to Sleep Among Titans, where we drift through strange and quiet corners of the past. Perfect for listening before you sleep. Tonight, we're getting into the weird world of medieval folklore. And let's be clear, this isn't the sanitized Disney version with friendly singing animals. This is the original gritty, don't step on that cracker, a demon will probably steal your chickens kind of belief. It was the unofficial operating system for a world that had no IT support. Our guide is a man named Alaric, a simple woodsman. The sun has just dipped below the trees, and he's walking home. It's that quiet, vaguely unsettling time of day twilight, when the world doesn't feel quite solid. He passes a large, moss-covered rock. To you or me, it's just a rock. But in Alaric's world, it comes with a very serious one-star user review, passed down through generations. Do not touch the moss rock after sunset. There's no explanation, no story about what happens if you do. It's just a rule, and that quiet certainty is what makes it so powerful. Alaric, a practical man, doesn't necessarily believe it, but he also walks a little faster, and that simple, strange superstition is our doorway in. Because if a random rock holds that much power, imagine what they believed about the things that really mattered. Like a baby that just wouldn't stop crying, or the unsettling noises coming from inside the walls of your own home. This rock is just the beginning. On that note, I'm always curious where you're listening to this from. Are you in a busy city with sirens in the distance or a quiet house in the suburbs? Let me know in the comments below. It's fascinating to think of this story about a dark medieval forest echoing out into our modern world, reaching you wherever you are. So Alaric finally makes it back, leaving the moss rock and its silent judgment behind him. He steps over the invisible line that separates the wild forest from his village Oakhaven. And honestly, Oakhaven isn't much to look at. It's not a charming medieval postcard. It's a handful of thatched roof houses with slightly crooked walls leaning against each other for support. The air smells of wood smoke, damp earth, and the simple promise of someone's stew cooking over a fire. From the glowing windows, you can hear the low murmur of voices. This small, fragile circle of light and sound is humanity's fortress against the vast, quiet darkness. It's home. To understand a place like this, you have to understand their map of the world. It wasn't like ours, with neat lines for roads and countries. Their map was a messy, overlapping thing layered with rules and spirits. Think of it less like Google Maps and more like a supernatural version of augmented reality. The physical world was right there, but overlaid on top of it was a world of things. That stream you get your water from. It has its own personality and its own rules. Don't drink from it after a storm, not because of bacteria, but because the water spirit is angry. That ancient oak tree on the hill. It has its own terms and conditions, and you'd better read the fine print before you think about taking a branch for firewood. This wasn't just superstition, it was a fundamental law of physics for them. The spiritual and the physical were the same thing, and that's the key. Folklore wasn't just entertainment, it was a field guide. A troubleshooting manual for a dangerous and confusing world passed down, not in books, but in hushed warnings from mother to child. It gave you a framework for understanding why a perfectly healthy baby might suddenly sicken and change. And it offered some, let's call them unconventional solutions for dealing with it. It explained exactly why you should always leave a small bowl of milk by the hearth at night, because the alternative was waking up to find every spoon in the house bent sideways. And it told you in no uncertain terms why you must never disturb the ancient burial mound that lies just beyond the village fields. Some things it whispered are better left sleeping, so let's step out of the cold and into one of these homes where the first of these quiet fears is beginning to take root. The home we're entering belongs to a young couple, Elara and Lars. It's a simple place, really just one room built around a central hearth. The air inside is thick with the smell of drying herbs, wood smoke, and the faint sweet scent of a newborn. For the first few weeks, this small room was a universe of happiness. Their first child, a boy they named Finn, was healthy and loud and perfect. He was a promise of the future, a new link in a chain stretching back generations. Their life was for a moment utterly normal, and then it wasn't. It started subtly. A fever at first, the kind of thing that sends a flutter of worry through any new parent. But the fever broke, and yet the baby changed. The cry was the first sign. It wasn't the full-throated roar of a hungry infant anymore. It became a thin, reedy and incessant whine, a sound like a dry twig snapping over and over. It was a sound that didn't just ask for comfort, it demanded it. yet seemed to reject it the moment it was given. Then there were his eyes. Newborns have that unfocused, milky gaze. But Finn's eyes started to look at Elara with a chillingly ancient focus. They didn't seem to look at her with love so much as through her, with a kind of cold, calculating intelligence. It was the gaze of a bitter old man, a landlord, a tax collector, all trapped in the tiny wrinkled face of her son. He began to eat ravenously, draining Elara of her strength, yet he grew thinner. His skin became pale and waxy, his limbs long and spidery. Now, from our modern germ theory-loving perspective, we have a dozen labels for what might have been happening. Colic, a congenital disorder, a sudden onset allergy, 1,000 unfortunate but natural possibilities. But Elara and Lars didn't have those labels. They didn't have doctors or diagnoses. They had folklore. And folklore provided a single, terrifyingly elegant explanation. For this horror, the baby in the cradle was not their son. This, the Whispers said, was a changeling. The concept is both brilliant and monstrous. The story goes that the Hulderfolk, the hidden people, the fairies, the creatures from the woods and hills covet human children. Sometimes they steal a healthy baby from its cradle and leave one of their own sickly ancient offspring in its place. This stock, as it was called, would drain the life and resources from the human family until it was discovered. It's a terrible idea. But it's also a powerful one. It gives an unthinkable tragedy a name. It gives parents a target for their grief and their rage. It's not that your beautiful child is sick or gone, it's that a monster has taken their place. It's not your fault. It's an invasion. And for Elara, this idea began as a tiny poisonous seed planted by a worried glance from a neighbour watered by the hushed whispers she overheard at the village well. Soon it grew into a suffocating vine wrapping itself around her heart. The love she felt for her son curdled into suspicion, then into fear. Her home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison occupied by an unknown enemy. So she began to fight back, not with weapons, but with the quiet magic of her ancestors. One night after Lars was asleep, she crept to the cradle. Her hands trembled as she slipped a pair of heavy iron shears under the thin mattress. Iron everyone knew was anathema to the hidden people. It burned them. It was a cold, hard piece of the human world that they could not abide. The next day she sprinkled a line of salt across the threshold of their door, another ancient barrier against evil, heartbreakingly small acts of defiance against a cosmic horror. But the worst part was the silence inside Elara herself. She still cared for the creature in the cradle. She fed it, cleaned it, held it. But she did so with the detached efficiency of a jailer. The lullabies died in her throat. The cooing sounds she used to make turned to ash in her mouth. How do you sing to something you suspect is not your child? How do you press your cheek against a face you believe is a mask for some ancient malevolent being? Every day became a performance. She and Lars would pretend for each other, pretend for the village. But at night they would lie awake in the darkness listening to that thin, reedy cry that never seemed to stop, listening to the sound of their hope slowly draining away. And this is where we leave Elara for now, sitting in a low chair by the fire in the dead of night, the rest of the village asleep. The only light is the dying, flickering embers casting long dancing shadows on the wall. She's watching the cradle, and the thing inside is watching her back with those old cold eyes. There is no solution in sight. There is only the long night ahead, and the terrible unanswered question hanging in the silence between a mother and the child that might not be her own. This is the terror that folklore offered when the darkness got inside your home, inside your bloodline. But what about the other spirits? The ones who were already there? The ones you had to appease just to keep your soup from burning? Or the ones that waited for you outside in the marshlands with pretty dancing lights to lead you far from safety? The world was full of rules, and breaking them had consequences. So we leave Elara's home, a house chilled by silent fear, and we drift through the wall into the neighbouring cottage. The air here is different. It's warmer, calmer. It feels settled. Because while Elara is battling a supernatural invader, her neighbour, an old widow named Isolde, is quietly maintaining a very delicate partnership with a spirit that was there long before she was. Not all spirits in this world were things to be feared. Some were simply the original tenants. And if you wanted to live a peaceful life, you had to learn to be a good roommate. Every culture across the old world had a name for this entity. In Scotland, it was a brownie. In Germany, a kobold. In Slavic lands, the domovoi. The details change, but the core concept is the same. Think of it as the original smart home, except instead of a sleek minimalist cylinder running on Wi-Fi, you had a grumpy, invisible and intensely private little man who lived in the warmest spot near your hearth. And he had rules. This relationship wasn't one of worship, it was a contract. A quiet, unspoken agreement between the human family and the soul of the house itself. The terms were simple. First, you had to show respect. This meant keeping the house reasonably clean and tidy. It meant no swearing or loud arguments near the hearth. The brownie was a traditionalist, and he valued a peaceful home. Most importantly, you had to pay him for his services. Every single night before bed, you would pour out a small bowl of your best milk or cream, or leave a piece of good bread, maybe with a little honey or butter. This wasn't a sacrifice. This was his salary. It was an acknowledgement that his work had value. And what was his work? Well, if you upheld your end of the bargain, your house just ran better. The fire which you'd banked for the night would be mysteriously easy to restart in the morning, with a few embers still glowing hot. The cream in the churn would turn to butter faster. A tool handle that was coming loose would feel firm in your hand the next day. The endless little chores of the household would seem just a bit lighter. The brownie was the unseen maintenance man, the night shift worker who swept the hearth, mended broken things and kept the subtle machinery of domestic life running smoothly. From our modern view, it's easy to see the genius behind this belief. It's a brilliant psychological life hack. If you genuinely believe an invisible creature will help you out if you keep a clean and peaceful home, you're far more likely to, well, keep a clean and peaceful home. It externalizes self-discipline. The brownie isn't just a spirit. He is the personification of a well-run, happy household. He is the quiet hum of contentment made manifest. But what happened if you broke the contract? This wasn't like angering a demon. There was no fire and brimstone. The brownie's revenge was far more petty. It was a campaign of passive-aggressive inconvenience. If you let the house get filthy or forgot his nightly offering of milk, the trouble would start. A pot of soup would inexplicably tip over on the hearth. Your favourite knife would go missing only to turn up a week later in the chicken coop. You'd wake up to find all your shoes filled with pebbles. The spirit wouldn't help you anymore. He would actively and irritatingly get in your way. He wasn't trying to kill you. He was trying to make your life just annoying enough that you'd remember your manners and put out the bowl of cream. There was, however, one unforgivable sin. The one thing that would break the contract forever. You must never ever try to see the spirit, and you must never give it clothes. There's an old sad story about this. A farmer's wife who, out of a misplaced sense of pity, decided that her hard-working brownie must be cold in his rags. So she lovingly sewed a tiny set of woolen clothes and left them by the hearth instead of the usual bowl of milk. She didn't get a thank you. The next morning the house was cold and silent. The clothes were gone, and according to the legend she heard a small sorrowful voice whispering from the rafters, "I have gotten a coat and I have gotten a sark, now I am a great man and I will do no more work." Her gift was an insult. It turned his honourable reciprocal work into charity. It broke the magic. The brownie was gone forever, and from that day on the farm's luck soured, the tools broke, the milk curdled, and the house never quite felt right again. It had lost its soul. So that's how you managed the spirits you lived with. A delicate daily negotiation. But that was the easy part. You were on home turf. What happened when you left the safety of your hearth and had to navigate a world full of spirits who didn't follow any household rules at all? What about the treacherous lights in the swamp that promised warmth but delivered only cold, muddy death? Or the ancient silent kings sleeping in their mounds who did not take kindly to being disturbed? The world outside your door had no contract to offer. That delicate contract with the household spirit was for a world you could control. Your home, your hearth. But the hook I left you with was, what happens when you step outside? What about the spirits who don't care about your rules, your offerings, or your good manners? To answer that, we have to leave the quiet cottages behind and follow Alaric as he steps into the only public house in Oakhaven. It's not really a tavern, more of a large smoky room attached to a farmer's house. The air inside is thick and alive. It smells of wet wool, spilled ale, wood smoke, and unwashed bodies. It's loud but not cheerful. It's the sound of tired men unwinding their voices, a low rumble under the rafters. This isn't a place for celebration. It's the village's central nervous system where news is shared, bargains are made, and fears are given a voice. And tonight a story is being told. The storyteller is a peat cutter named Eamon, a man with a face like a worn leather map, and hands permanently stained by the bog. The subject of his tale is a merchant who passed through a week ago, a man from a city far away, with a fine cloak and an air of knowing better than everyone else. We all know the type, don't we? A man whose schedule is far too important to be delayed by the quaint advice of locals. The kind of man who today would absolutely argue with his GPS, convinced he knows a better shortcut. This merchant, Eamon explains, was in a hurry to get to the next town. The villagers warned him to stick to the high road, especially with dusk approaching. They told him to avoid the direct route through the glimmering marshes. He laughed. A muddy field, he scoffed, was hardly a danger to a man like him. So he set off alone as the sun began to bleed across the horizon. Eamon leans forward and the men around him lean in too. He describes the scene. The sun vanishes. A thick, clammy fog rises from the ground, swallowing the path, confusing all sense of direction. The merchant, suddenly not so confident, finds himself turned around lost. The air grows cold. The only sound is the squelch of his fine boots in the mud and the frantic thumping of his own heart. Panic begins to set in, and then he sees it. Off in the distance, a light. Not a big roaring fire, but a small, gentle glow like a lantern held by a steady hand. It bobs softly just ahead, a single point of warmth and hope in the vast cold darkness. A house, he must have thought. A traveller like me. Salvation. Now we have a modern scientific name for this phenomenon. It's called ignis fatuus, Latin for the foolish fire. It's caused by the oxidation of gases like phosphine and methane, which are released by rotting organic matter in the swamp. It's swamp gas. But let's be honest, a pocket of self-igniting methane is a terrible monster. It has no malice, no intent. A malicious fairy with a lantern made from a soul on the other hand. A spirit whose entire purpose is to mimic hope, in order to lead you to your doom. That is a story that will keep you on the path. And that is what the people of Oakhaven believed this light to be. They called it a will-o'-the-wisp, a soul in a bottle, a jack-o'-lantern. The merchant, of course, knew nothing of this. He only saw a friendly light. He shouted towards it, but there was no reply. He began to walk, then stumble, then run towards it, his feet sinking deeper into the wet ground. The light was always patient. It never got further away, but it never got any closer either. It just danced ahead, luring him on deeper and deeper into the marsh. Away from the solid ground, away from the path, away from any hope of survival. Eamon's story doesn't have a dramatic ending. There's no struggle, no scream. It's quieter and colder than that. He simply says that the next morning when he went out to the bogs, he found the merchant's fine, expensive cloak snagged on a thorn bush at the edge of the deep peat. Of the man himself there was no sign at all. He had been swallowed whole. He had put his faith in a foolish fire, and the marsh had claimed him for it. A silence falls over the tavern. Someone quietly makes a sign against evil. Alaric stares into his empty cup. The story settles in the air, a lesson learned once more. Some parts of the world are not just dangerous, they are actively deceptive. They use your own hope as bait. This treacherous light is a trap for the souls of the living. But what about the places that belong to the souls of the dead? The silent grassy mounds where ancient kings were said to sleep on their beds of gold. They didn't need to lure you in with pretty lights. Their danger was a quiet, cold warning that radiated from the very soil. And what about the forest itself? Not the creatures in it, but the ancient watchful spirit of it, the one that some claim could gaze out at you from behind the bark of any tree. The rules were everywhere. The stories told in the tavern around the warmth of the fire are one thing. They are fears shared, and in sharing they are lessened. But the world outside the village has its own warnings, ones that are silent and that you must face alone. The hook we ended on was about the places belonging to the dead, and to explore that we must follow Alaric the next morning. The sun is up, the air is clean and cool. The fears of the night feel distant and a little foolish in the bright light of day. Alaric is on his way to work, axe on his shoulder, his path taking him along the edge of the wide, flat fields that surround Oakhaven. And it's here in the middle of a field of barley that he sees it. It's a hill. Or not quite a hill. It's a perfectly smooth, unnaturally round mound of earth covered in grass that's a richer, deeper green than any of the surrounding crops. It's perhaps twice as tall as a man. To us it's an archaeological treasure. A barrow, a tumulus, a time capsule from the Bronze Age. We'd show up with ground-penetrating radar data sheets and a very excited documentary film crew. To Alaric it isn't history, it's a house, and somebody is still home. This barrow and others like it that dot the landscape were remnants of a culture so ancient that the people of Oakhaven had no name for it. These were the tombs of forgotten kings and chieftains, and the fundamental rule, the one piece of folklore that was absolute, was that you treated them with the same respect you would give a sleeping dragon. There were, of course, a set of unwritten regulations. First, you did not trespass. You never ever walked over the top of a barrow. You walked around it, maintaining a respectful distance. To walk over it was to tread on the roof of a king's hall, an act of supreme disrespect. Second, and this was the big one, you did not take anything. Not a single beautiful flower that grew on its slopes, not a loose stone from its base, and certainly not a spadeful of its earth. The story said these mounds were filled with the gold and jewels of the kings who slept within, but that treasure was not for the living. It was part of the king's life force in the afterworld. To steal from the mound wasn't just theft, it was soul vandalism. And third, you were quiet. As Alaric passes, he instinctively lowers his head. His footsteps seem softer. This is not a place for idle chatter or laughter. It is a place of eternal heavy silence. The fear here is different from the mischievous will-o'-the-wisp. The spirit guarding a barrow was not a tricky imp, it was a Barrow-wight. In some tales, a draugr. And this is not a ghost. A ghost is an echo, a memory. A draugr was believed to be the reanimated physical corpse of the dead king himself, still in his tomb, swollen with supernatural strength, guarding his hoard with a jealous, malevolent rage. It was a terrifyingly physical monster, not an apparition but an undead thing of flesh and bone and cold grave dirt. Alaric remembers his grandmother telling him a story, a warning about a shepherd from a village far away, a greedy fool who decided to dig into a barrow at night hoping for gold. They found him at dawn, wandering the fields, his mind shattered, his hair as white as snow, muttering about a dead cold hand that had gripped his arm from beneath the earth. So Alaric keeps his distance. He looks at the mound. He feels no active terror. The sun is shining, the birds are singing. But he feels the weight of the place, the sheer immovable gravity of it. It radiates a coldness, a warning that is as real to him as the warmth of the sun on his face. He might be poor, but the sleeping king can keep his gold. The trade is not worth contemplating. His world is one of living trees and breathing animals. This place is a monument to death, and it is a border he knows not to cross. It's a strange and quiet negotiation, respecting the dead, the ancient man-made world that lies just beneath the surface of his own. But Alaric is a woodsman. The majority of his life is spent in a place far older than any king's tomb, a place that wasn't built by human hands at all. What happens when you spend so much time alone in the deep woods that you start to feel it has a mind of its own? Not a wight, not a ghost, but a vast, slow consciousness. What do you do when you look at an ancient oak tree and you get the distinct unnerving feeling that it's looking right back at you? The hook that left us lingering was about the forest itself. Not the spirits that live in it, but the spirit of it. The ancient, slow consciousness of the woods. And to feel that we must follow Alaric deeper into his world than we have ever been before, he leaves the open fields and the silent barrow behind. He walks for an hour past the familiar groves where he sources his firewood beyond the trees that are merely old and into the part of the forest the villagers call the Old Wood. The light here changes. It's no longer the bright open light of the sun. It's a dim green filtered light as if passing through stained glass. The air is still cool and smells of centuries of damp earth and decay. All sounds are muffled, swallowed by the sheer mass of trees. It's like stepping into a cathedral, but one so old it has forgotten the name of its god. Alaric isn't afraid here. This is his office, his workshop. He knows the whisper of the wind through pine versus its rustle through oak. He can distinguish the snap of a twig under a deer's hoof from one under a boar's. He is a master of this place. He is at home, and that is what makes what happens next so unsettling. He stops to rest, leaning his back against an oak tree of immense size. It's a true giant, a king of the forest, its bark gnarled and folded into 1,000 deep wrinkles. And as he catches his breath, his eyes trace the patterns on the trunk before him, and he sees it. It's a face. It's not a carving. It's a coincidence of nature. 2 dark knots, deep set and shadowed, form a pair of hollow eyes. A long vertical ridge of bark creates a perfect high-bridged nose. Below it, a dark, moss-filled hollow suggests a mouth open just slightly, as if in a state of perpetual silent surprise. It is an impassive, ancient, and utterly non-human face. It expresses no emotion. It simply is, and its hollow eyes are staring directly at him. Now, our modern brain has a neat little filing cabinet for this experience. The label on the file says pareidolia. It's the hardwired human tendency to see familiar patterns, especially faces in random arrangements of objects. It's why we see a man in the moon, or a rabbit in the clouds. It's a feature, not a bug of our evolutionary software designed to help us spot predators hiding in the bushes. But Alaric doesn't have that file. His mental framework offers a different, far older explanation. What he is seeing resonates with a symbol he has seen carved into the stone of the village church, a pagan image that was too powerful for Christianity to erase the green man. That face made of leaves and vines that peers out from the margins of sacred places. The green man isn't a god or a specific spirit. He is the raw, untamable life force of the natural world. He is the symbol of an eternal cycle of growth, death, and rebirth that operates on a timescale humans can barely comprehend. He is the spirit of the world beyond the village walls, and sometimes he manages to sneak inside. Alaric knows on one level that he is looking at bark and moss and shadow. His rational mind, the part that fells trees and bargains for prices, understands this. But the older part of his mind, the part that respects the moss rock and listens to tales of the foolish fire, feels something else entirely. He feels with absolute certainty that he is being seen, not by a creature or a ghost. He feels he's being perceived by the woods itself. The feeling is immense. It's a sudden dizzying awareness of his own smallness, his own fleeting mortality. This tree was here centuries before his birth, and will be here centuries after his bones are dust. He's a brief warm-blooded flicker in a slow, cold green world. The forest isn't hostile. The face isn't angry. It is simply aware of him. And in that awareness is a profound and terrifying indifference. He is not important. He is just there. A guest in its ancient hall. The moment stretches. The wind dies down. The forest holds its breath. A primal fear, the fear of being small and insignificant in the face of something vast and eternal, prickles Alaric's skin. It's a moment of terrifying religious awe. Then a bird sings and the spell is broken. The face is just bark again. Alaric pushes himself off the tree. He doesn't run. He doesn't look back. He simply gives the trunk a slow, deliberate nod of acknowledgement, a sign of respect. And then he turns and continues with his work. But for the rest of the day, the forest feels different. It no longer seems like a collection of individual trees. It feels like a single connected entity. The familiar sounds now seem conscious. The rustle of leaves is no longer just the wind. It's the whisper of a turning page. The snap of a twig is the clearing of a throat. He feels like he's walking through the body of a great sleeping giant. This is the final quiet lesson of the Oakhaven folklore. The world is not an inanimate stage for the drama of human life. It is a living, breathing character in its own right, with its own ancient awareness. And to feel that watchful presence in the green fullness of summer is one thing. But summer is now ending. A distinct chill is creeping into the morning air. The days are growing noticeably shorter. The great green canopy is about to blaze into glory and then fall, leaving the woods bare and skeletal. As the long, dark, hungry nights of winter approach, the old folk say the veil between the world of the living and the world of spirits grows thin indeed. The stories get darker, and the fears come much, much closer to home. The hook I left you with was a promise of the thinning veil of the world turning towards darkness as winter approached. And so the great slow change begins. It doesn't happen all at once. It starts with a feeling. A subtle shift in the quality of the light in the late afternoon. A certain crispness in the pre-dawn air that makes you pull your cloak a little tighter. The sun, a loyal friend all summer, starts to become lazy. It rises a little later each day and slips away a little earlier, as if it too is getting tired. For us, the end of summer is a mood. It's the last barbecue of the season, a clearance sale on patio furniture. It's a gentle melancholy. For the people of Oakhaven, it wasn't a mood. It was a deadline. The sound of a great cosmic clock ticking down. Winter was not a season. It was an opponent, and you had a few short months to prepare for the siege. Then comes the brief blazing glory. The forest, which had been a uniform deep green, decides to put on one last spectacular show. The leaves of the maple and oak and birch trees catch fire, turning impossible shades of gold, blazing orange and blood red. For a few weeks, the world is more beautiful, more vibrant than it has been all year. It's a fierce, defiant beauty, a final deep breath before the plunge. In the village, the work is frantic. This is the season of preparation. The harvest is brought in from the fields, every last grain precious. The sound of Alaric's axe and the axes of all the other men rings out from dawn till dusk, a constant rhythmic beat, as they chop and stack the firewood that will mean the difference between life and death. Women are busy salting fish, smoking meat, preserving vegetables, mending heavy woolen clothes. Every single activity is bent towards a single goal, surviving the cold and surviving the hunger. Then, just as quickly as it came, the glory is gone. The wind picks up and the beautiful leaves let go. They rain down from the sky and the forest floor becomes a thick carpet of gold. But a week later the rain comes and that carpet turns into a brown sodden mush. The world once so full of colour bleeds into 100 shades of brown and grey. The trees are now bare skeletal fingers clawing at a low heavy sky. The forest is no longer a welcoming canopy. It's a place of stark tangled lines, and the wind whistles through it with a new mournful voice. One morning the village wakes up to a world transformed by the first hard frost. Every blade of grass, every bare branch, every spider's web is edged in delicate white crystals. It is exquisitely beautiful, but it is the beauty of a corpse. It is the first touch of the deep killing cold. Now the village truly retreats into itself. The heavy wooden doors are barred more often than they are open. The social life of Oakhaven shrinks from the village green to the space around each family's hearth. And the darkness becomes a character in the story. The days are brutally short, a few hours of weak grey light, and then the sun gives up entirely. The nights are immense, stretching on for what feels like an eternity. It is a perfect, profound blackness, a physical presence that presses in on the thin wattle and daub walls of their homes. This is when the fears change. The summertime fears of getting lost or offending a nature spirit are gone. They are replaced by the winter fears. The fear of the firewood running out, the fear of the stored food spoiling, and the fear of what walks in that deep oppressive darkness when the veil between the worlds is stretched to its absolute thinnest. And then one evening it begins, softly, silently. The first snowflakes begin to drift down from the sky. They are few at first, then more, then a thick silent curtain covering the grey dead world in a blanket of pure white. The world is now quiet. The work is done. The village is sealed in. All that is left to do is wait. And in that long quiet waiting, huddled around the fire through the endless nights, the old stories begin to stir. The winter tales. Stories told to pass the time, yes, but also to remember the rules of this new darker world. Stories about the great spectral hunt that rides the winter storms, about the rituals you must perform on the longest night to ensure the sun agrees to return at all, and about the eventual, almost unbelievable promise of a thaw. The battle is over. The siege has begun. And so the siege of winter continues. The snow piles up the world outside the cottage door becomes a vast silent sea of white, and the days shrink until they are little more than a few hours of weary grey light. In this deep freeze of the world we arrive at the very heart of the darkness, the tipping point, the longest night of the year. This is the winter solstice, the ancient festival of Yule. For us this time of year is defined by a gentle, almost commercialised warmth. It's about cosy sweaters, twinkling lights, and a carefully curated playlist of festive music. For the people of Oakhaven, this was a night of profound and existential anxiety. Their celebration was not born of joy, but of a desperate, concerted effort to stave off a genuine fear. What if this time the darkness wins? It's a ridiculous thought to us with our scientific understanding of axial tilts and orbital mechanics. But when your entire existence depends on that ball of fire in the sky, and you have watched it get weaker and lower and more distant every single day for 3 months, the thought that it might just give up entirely isn't so ridiculous. It's the single most terrifying possibility in the universe. And so on this longest night they didn't just hope for the sun's return, they actively worked to make it happen. The centrepiece of this great work was the Yule log. This wasn't some small decorative piece of birch. This was a colossal log, often an entire tree trunk, usually oak or ash, chosen with great care months earlier. On the day of the solstice it was brought into the house with ceremony. It was so large it had to be dragged, not carried across the threshold. The log was then decorated, dressed in the symbols of life that stubbornly persisted even in the dead of winter sprigs of holly, with its waxy green leaves and blood-red berries, coils of ivy, and bunches of mistletoe. Then came the most crucial moment. The log was lit not with a fresh flame but with a charred piece saved from last year's Yule log. This was the whole point. It was a ritual of continuity. It symbolized that the sun's fire, the fire of life, had never truly been extinguished. It had been carefully preserved in their own hearth through the previous year's darkness, and now its strength was being passed on a sacred lineage of light. The Yule log was a magical engine. Its purpose was to burn brightly through the entire endless night, and ideally for the next several days. By keeping this powerful fire alive in their own homes, they believed they were feeding the weakened sun, giving it strength, and showing it the way back from its long journey into the underworld. It was a massive act of sympathetic magic, the collective will of the entire village focused on a single burning purpose. Inside Alaric's home, the atmosphere is thick and close. The fire from the great log is the only light casting huge dancing shadows that make the small room seem like a cave full of giants. The family and a few neighbours are gathered. They are feasting, eating the best of their smoked meats and preserved fruits. This isn't just a party, it's another act of faith. They are consuming their precious winter stores in a defiant belief that the sun will return, the spring will come, and the earth will provide for them once more. And as they eat, they tell stories. With the veil between worlds at its thinnest, this is the night for the oldest and most powerful tales. Stories of gods and heroes of creation and destruction. It is a way to pass the immense oppressive darkness, but also to weave their community closer together, reinforcing the shared knowledge and beliefs that give them strength. As the night wears on, the feasting ends and the storytelling trickles to a halt. The children and some of the adults doze by the fire wrapped in blankets. The mood shifts from fragile celebration to a quiet, tense vigil. All there is to do now is wait and listen. Listen to the pop and hiss of the great log, and listen to the wind howling outside. In the deep, profound silence of the longest night, every sound is magnified. Every gust of wind that shrieks around the corners of the house feels like something more. The old ones like Isolde listen intently, and they swear that on a night like this, if you listen closely enough, the wind carries other sounds within it. The faint spectral baying of hounds, the distant clear call of a hunting horn, a sound that bypasses the ears and chills the soul because it is the sound of the great ghostly hunt riding out the storm. A reminder that even as they keep their vigil for the light, the most powerful spirits of the darkness are on the move. But for now their focus is on the east, and then it happens. Not a glorious sunrise, but an almost imperceptible change. The absolute ink black of the sky softens to a deep bruised purple, then slowly to a cold hard grey. A collective silent sigh of relief passes through the room. They have done it. Their vigil is over. The sun is weak, pale and distant, but it is returning. They have passed the great test. But the coldest, darkest days of winter are still ahead, and the spirits that ride the storm are not yet finished with the night. That sound on the wind during the Yule vigil, that faint spectral horn, was just an echo, a rumour of what the deepest winter held. But weeks later, in the dead heart of the season, when the world seems to have been frozen for an eternity, the real thing arrives. We are back with Alaric alone in his small cottage. Outside, a blizzard of impossible fury is raging. It's a true whiteout, a chaotic vortex of wind and driven snow that erases the world. The cottage groans and shudders under the assault. Alaric's entire universe has shrunk to this one small room, his only companion the steady, hungry fire on his hearth. It is on a night like this, when the natural world is at its most violent, that the supernatural world decides to ride out. This is the night of the Wild Hunt. The myth is one of the oldest and most widespread in Europe. The name of its leader changes depending on where you are. In the Norse and Germanic lands that are the bedrock of Oakhaven's culture, the huntsman is often Woden, or Odin, the All-Father, the god of wisdom, poetry, and the furious dead leading his host across the sky. In later Christianized versions, the leader becomes a figure of damnation, Cain the first murderer, or even the devil himself. But the form of the hunt is always the same, a phantasmagorical procession of spectral hunters, horses and hounds tearing through the winter sky. They are a force of nature and an omen of doom. To witness them is to invite disaster, war plague, or your own sudden death. So the folklore provides a very simple, very strict set of instructions. It's the supernatural equivalent of a tornado warning. You hear it coming, you get inside, you bar the door. You do not under any circumstances look. You make yourself small, you pray to whatever god you hold dear, and you wait for it to pass you by. Inside his hut, Alaric feels a change in the storm. The wind's roar, which had been a chaotic, senseless noise, begins to take on a rhythm. A deep thrumming beat like 1,000 massive drums far away. He freezes a half-eaten piece of bread in his hand. He knows this sound. He has been warned about it his entire life. Then woven into the thrumming a new sound begins. It is the baying of hounds. But the sound is wrong. It isn't the familiar cry of the village dogs. It's thin, ethereal, and filled with a ravenous, echoing hunger. And it seems to come from all directions at once, from the sky above, from the ground below. Alaric gets up slowly. He doesn't go to the window. He goes to the hearth and places another heavy log on the fire. It's a desperate instinctual act, fighting back against a supernatural cold. And then the hunt is upon him. A horn blast, sharp and terrifyingly clear, cuts straight through the blizzard's roar. It's a sound of wild, ecstatic, inhuman joy. It rings in the bones. Immediately the drumming becomes the thunder of countless galloping hooves. Not on the frozen earth outside, but directly overhead. The thatched roof of his cottage seems to vibrate with it, shaking loose little bits of dust and straw. It is the sound of a spectral cavalry passing just feet above his head. Through the noise he can hear them, the shouts of the hunters, a language of pure guttural fury, the thrill of a chase beyond mortal understanding. Alaric is no longer standing. He's huddled on the floor, his back pressed against the warm stones of the hearth. He has his hands clamped over his ears, but it's useless. The sound isn't just sound. It's a physical pressure, a vibration that shakes his very soul. He squeezes his eyes shut, fighting a powerful, morbid curiosity to look. To just peek through a crack in the wooden shutter to see what this impossible noise looks like. But he knows the rule. He knows the legend. To see the hunt is to be swept up in it, your soul torn from your body to join the roaring host for eternity, forever hunting, forever hungry. He focuses on the real, the rough, splintery texture of the floorboards under his palms, the intense heat of the fire on his back, the familiar, smoky smell of his own home. He anchors himself to the living world as the parade of the dead rages just outside. It feels like an eternity, but it might only be a few minutes. As slowly as it began, the sound begins to move on. The thunder of the hooves recedes, moving east. The wild shouts and the horn blasts become fainter. The hungry baying of the hounds dissolves back into the sound of the wind, and then silence. The only sound left is the blizzard, but now it seems gentle, almost peaceful by comparison. The silence that the hunt leaves in its wake is more profound, more deafening than the noise itself. Alaric doesn't move. He stays curled on the floor, trembling, listening to the frantic beating of his own heart. The fire has burned low, the room is cold, but he is alive. He is safe. He followed the rules. He has survived the longest night. He has survived the spectral hunt. He has endured the very worst that the winter, both natural and supernatural, could throw at him. And after a night of such profound, unearthly terror, the world cannot remain locked in its icy grip forever. The sun, however weak, is returning day by day, and soon, when the ice that has held the world captive finally begins to lose its strength, the first drop of meltwater will fall from the eaves of his cottage. It is a sound more magical than any hunting horn. It is the sound of a promise being kept. It is the sound of the thaw. That single drop of water we heard at the end of our last segment, it is a prophecy, a promise made in the silent language of the world. And soon one drop becomes 2, then 10, then 1,000. A constant, gentle, percussive rhythm begins all across Oakhaven. It is the sound of the thaw, the sound of the great siege breaking. For months the world has been hard white and silent. Now it begins to soften. The immense weight of the snow becomes heavy and wet, pulling away from the dark trunks of the trees. The thick ice on the stream groans and cracks, and for the first time since autumn, you can hear the sound of running water beneath it, a muffled gurgling voice waking from a long sleep. Patches of dark, muddy, wonderfully ugly earth appear on the sunniest slopes, the first sight of solid ground in an eternity. The very air changes. The sunlight, which for months has been a weak, watery presence, now has a genuine warmth to it. It feels different on the skin, and the air smells of things again. Not just the clean, sterile scent of snow, but the rich, complex smell of damp earth, of thawing life. To the people of Oakhaven, it is the most beautiful smell in the world. There's a collective unspoken sigh of relief throughout the village. People emerge from their homes, blinking in the strengthening light. They move slower, their bodies still stiff from the long confinement of winter. But there are smiles. Quiet, tired smiles. On the longest night, they had made a desperate bargain with the universe, keeping their fires lit to show the sun the way home. And now the universe is holding up its end of the deal. For them, this muddy, messy, dripping world is a miracle. And as the world outside begins to heal, a small, quiet healing is happening inside the cottage of Elara and Lars. All winter long, their home has been a place of silent dread, haunted by the sickly, wailing child they feared was a changeling. The creature that ate ravenously but grew thinner, that watched them with ancient, unsettling eyes. Elara had performed her small rituals, the iron shears, the line of salt, and had endured caring for the child with a cold, hollow sense of duty. But with the thaw, something begins to shift in the cradle. It happens gradually. The thin, reedy cry that had tormented them for months begins to soften, to sound less like a demand and more like a simple request. One afternoon, the child Finn sleeps for 3 hours straight, a deep and peaceful sleep. The low-grade fever that had clung to his skin for as long as they could remember finally breaks. His pale, waxy skin begins to take on a healthier, pinkish hue. He starts to gain a little weight. And one morning Elara looks down at him, and the old unnervingly intelligent gaze is gone. He's just looking up at the world with the wide, unfocused, innocent wonder of a normal baby. Her baby. So what happened? The folklore has a clear and satisfying answer. The changeling, the stock left by the hidden people, was a creature of darkness and winter. It could not survive the growing strength of the sun. As life returned to the world, its own unnatural life withered. The rituals, the endurance, the simple refusal to give up had worked. The hidden people defeated had no choice but to take their own creature back and return the stolen human child. The magic had worked. Elara was victorious. Of course, our modern world has a different, less magical explanation. The baby had a severe lingering illness, and his immune system was weak. He spent months in a small, smoky, poorly ventilated cottage, which only made things worse. With the coming of spring, the air grew warmer and cleaner. The child's body, freed from the constant stress of the cold, simply had a chance to fight back. The fever finally broke. The healing was just biology running its slow and steady course. So which is the truth? An ancient magical exchange, or a simple case of an infant finally getting well? The beautiful thing is, for Elara, the answer does not matter. All she knows is that the child she holds in her arms now feels like her son. The fear that had been a cold knot in her stomach all winter has finally dissolved. She picks him up, and for the first time in months she sings him a lullaby, her voice quiet and a little rusty, but full of a warmth she thought she had lost forever. Later that day, she quietly retrieves the iron shears from beneath his mattress and puts them away with her sewing. Their purpose has been served. The great thaw has come both to the world of Oakhaven and to the small, once terrified world of this family. Life, fragile but persistent, has returned. The stories and rituals of winter were their shield, and they have emerged blinking into the spring. But what becomes of those stories now when the danger has passed? They settle into memory, changing from a survival guide into a history. They become the tales that old men tell to young boys by the fire. And Alaric, our guide through all this, how does he now see the forest that was once so full of dread? Does the breathing, living world he discovered still feel the same in the gentle, promising light of spring? The world is waking up, and as we discussed, the old dark stories of winter are being put away like heavy woolen cloaks, but they don't disappear. They settle into the soil of memory. They change. To see what they become, we have to let time do its work. So let's drift forward many years into the future. The scene is a quiet summer evening. Alaric is no longer a young man filled with a nervous respect for the world. He's in the middle of his life, his face weathered by sun and wind, his hands strong and capable. He sits on a bench outside his cottage, and with him is his own son, a boy of about 10 named Brant. And next to them sits Eamon, the peat cutter from the tavern. Eamon is ancient now, his back bent, his skin as thin and wrinkled as parchment, but his eyes still hold a sharp, clear light. The boy Brant has grown up hearing the winter tales, but for him they are just stories told by the fire on a stormy night. And so he asks the simple, direct question that every child eventually asks. Grand Eamon, he says, his voice earnest, the story about the merchant and the foolish fire in the swamp. Is it true? Alaric smiles and looks to the old man, giving him the floor. Eamon is silent for a long moment, watching the last of the sun's rays catch the dust motes dancing in the air. True, the old man finally rasps, his voice dry like rustling leaves. You boys, and your questions. Is a shadow true? Is the colour of the sky true? It's a foolish way to ask. He points a bony finger at the boy. Let me tell you a story. When I was your age, no bigger than a sapling, my friend and I dared each other to stay in the woods after dark to find a fox's den. The sun went down and the forest. It changed. Every rustle of leaves was a footstep. Every hoot of an owl was a warning. We saw things, or thought we did. A great dark shape moving between the trees. We were terrified. We ran all the way back to the village, convinced a forest troll was chasing us. He pauses, taking a slow breath. The next day my father took me back. He showed me the tracks of a wild boar. He showed me how a rotted stump in the moonlight can look just like a stooped and watching man. There was no troll, so it wasn't true, the boy says, a little disappointed. Ah, Eamon says, his eyes twinkling. I didn't say that. The troll wasn't true, but the fear was the truest thing in the world that night. The fear was real, and a boy who is full of that true fear is a boy who won't be foolish enough to get lost in the woods at night again. Do you see? And right there in that simple distinction is the beautiful, complicated heart of it all. These stories, the ones we've walked through together, are not lab reports. They are not scientific truths. They are emotional truths. They are psychological technology coded into narrative. The story of the Wild Hunt is not literally about a ghostly god riding through the sky. It's a story that gives a name, a face, and a set of rules to the terrifying, indiscriminate power of a winter blizzard. A blizzard can kill you. The story externalizes that random danger into a monster you can hide from. The story of the changeling isn't really about fairies. It's a heartbreakingly human way to cope with the confusion and grief of a child's inexplicable illness, a tragedy that has no other explanation. The folklore gives the pain a purpose, and in doing so makes it almost bearable. Eamon leans forward again, his voice becoming a conspiratorial whisper. We tell the story of the foolish fire so you won't be a fool. We tell the story of the Barrow-wight so you will respect the dead. We tell the story of the changeling so you will watch over your children. We tell the story of the brownie so you will keep a clean and happy house. He looks the boy square in the eye. So you ask me if the stories are true. I will tell you this. The swamp is treacherous. A sick child can break your heart. The winter is cruel, and the dead should be left in peace. The stories are just the maps our ancestors drew to help us navigate those truths. You don't have to believe in the drawing of the sea monster on the map, but you'd be a fool to ignore where it tells you the cliffs are. The old man's words settle in the quiet evening air. The boy Brant is silent, mulling over a thought far bigger than he is. But Alaric isn't looking at the old man or the boy. He's looking out at the dark line of the forest, the place where he lived these truths. He has heard the stories, and he has felt the fear. He knows what the map says. He has been to the edge of the world it describes. For him, the question isn't just about what the stories mean in the abstract. It's about what remains of them inside of him. How have they changed the way he sees the world he walks through every single day, in the quiet light of his own life's afternoon, after all he has seen and felt? How does it feel now when he steps back into the breathing silence of the forest? The old man's words settle in the quiet evening air, a map not of a place but of belief itself. But Alaric is not a philosopher, he is a woodsman, and for him the final understanding cannot be found in words, but only in the world itself. And so we follow him one last time as he steps back into the breathing silence of the forest. It's a few days after the conversation. It's a bright, clear morning, the air alive with birdsong and the hum of insects. He walks with no axe on his shoulder, no purpose but to walk. The forest is the same one we entered in our very first scene, but the man walking through it has been fundamentally changed. He is walking through the territory of his own memory. His path takes him along the edge of the woods, and there it is, the moss rock, the first source of his and our unease, the place with the simple, unexplained rule, do not touch. He stops and looks at it. The prickle of superstitious fear is gone. He feels no dread. Instead, he sees it for what Eamon's story revealed it to be, a boundary stone, a marker between the tame world of the village and the wild world of the woods, a silent, moss-covered signpost that simply said, "Pay attention, the rules are different here." He walks up to it, and after a moment's hesitation he reaches out and lays his palm flat against its cool, damp, mossy surface. It's not an act of defiance, it's an act of acknowledgement. A quiet greeting to an old landmark. He continues on his path, taking him to a rise where he can look out over the fields. In the distance he can see the smooth green curve of the Barrow, the king's mound, the home of the sleeping Draugr. He feels no terror. The stories of the Barrow-wight have lost their power to frighten him. He sees it now not as a place of active malice, but as a place of deep, profound history, a place of sadness and memory, and a king who simply wanted to be left in peace. He gives it a slow nod of respect, the same respect he would give any grave, and turns back toward the woods. He walks for a long time, deeper and deeper, until he arrives at the heart of his former unease. He stands before the ancient colossal oak. He looks up, and there it is, the face, the two dark knots for eyes, the ridge of bark for a nose, the hollow mouth. It is unchanged, a trick of light and nature. The last time he was here, he was overwhelmed by a sense of being watched, a feeling of his own insignificance that bordered on terror. Now, as he stands before it again, the feeling of being seen returns, but it has been transformed. The fear is gone, and in its place is a simple, profound sense of connection. He understands now. The forest is not indifferent. Indifference implies a complete lack of relationship. This is something else. This is coexistence. He's aware of the forest, and the forest in its own vast, slow, inhuman way is aware of him. He's not its master, and he's not its prey. He is simply a part of it. A temporary warm-blooded thinking component in a system of life that is far older and grander than his own mind can fully grasp. The face in the bark is not the face of a monster or a god. It is the face of the forest reflecting his own awareness back at him. It is a mirror. He steps forward and places his hand on the rough, warm bark of the great tree. He closes his eyes and just breathes with it, inhaling the scent of moss and earth and leaf mold, exhaling his own warm breath into the air. For a moment the boundary between Alaric and the forest seems to dissolve. He is not a man in the woods. He is a piece of the woods that is for a short time a man. The folklore was the language he was given as a child to understand all this, a language of wights and spirits and rules. But through his own life, through fear and watchfulness and quiet respect, he has learned to understand the world directly. He doesn't need the stories to mediate his experience anymore. He has become fluent in the silent language of the woods itself. He has not conquered the forest. He has not debunked its mysteries. He has simply found his place within it. After a long time, he takes his hand from the tree turns and begins the walk home. His stride is different now from the one we saw at the beginning of our tale. It is not the cautious, hurried tread of a man anxious to get back to the safety of the fire. It is the calm, steady and peaceful walk of a man who knows he's already home. And so Alaric's personal journey finds its peace. He has found his place in the world. But his story and the stories of Oakhaven are just one small thread in a vast and ancient tapestry. This same process of creating stories to explain the unexplainable, of drawing maps for the soul, to navigate a world full of both beauty and terror, was happening in 1,000 different villages in 1,000 different valleys all across the old world. These weren't just local superstitions. They were a fundamental part of the human experience, a shared technology for making sense of it all. The old man's words settle in the quiet evening air a map not of a place but of belief itself. But Alaric is not a philosopher. He is a woodsman, and for him the final understanding cannot be found in words, but only in the world itself. And so we follow him one last time as he steps back into the breathing silence of the forest. It's a few days after the conversation. It's a bright, clear morning, the air alive with birdsong and the hum of insects. He walks with no axe on his shoulder, no purpose but to walk. The forest is the same one we entered in our very first scene, but the man walking through it has been fundamentally changed. He is walking through the territory of his own memory. His path takes him along the edge of the woods, and there it is, the moss rock, the first source of his and our unease, the place with the simple, unexplained rule, do not touch. He stops and looks at it. The prickle of superstitious fear is gone. He feels no dread. Instead, he sees it for what Eamon's story revealed it to be, a boundary stone, a marker between the tame world of the village and the wild world of the woods, a silent moss-covered signpost that simply said, "Pay attention, the rules are different here." He walks up to it, and after a moment's hesitation he reaches out and lays his palm flat against its cool, damp, mossy surface. It's not an act of defiance. It's an act of acknowledgement. a quiet greeting to an old landmark. He continues on his path, taking him to a rise where he can look out over the fields. In the distance he can see the smooth green curve of the Barrow, the king's mound, the home of the sleeping Draugr. He feels no terror. The stories of the Barrow-wight have lost their power to frighten him. He sees it now not as a place of active malice, but as a place of deep, profound history, a place of sadness and memory, and a king who simply wanted to be left in peace. He gives it a slow nod of respect, the same respect he would give any grave, and turns back toward the woods. He walks for a long time, deeper and deeper, until he arrives at the heart of his former unease. He stands before the ancient colossal oak. He looks up, and there it is. The face, the two dark knots for eyes, the ridge of bark for a nose, the hollow mouth. It is unchanged, a trick of light and nature. The last time he was here, he was overwhelmed by a sense of being watched, a feeling of his own insignificance that bordered on terror. Now as he stands before it again, the feeling of being seen returns, but it has been transformed. The fear is gone, and in its place is a simple, profound sense of connection. He understands now. The forest is not indifferent. Indifference implies a complete lack of relationship. This is something else. This is coexistence. He is aware of the forest, and the forest in its own vast, slow, inhuman way is aware of him. He is not its master, and he is not its prey. He is simply a part of it, a temporary warm-blooded thinking component in a system of life that is far older and grander than his own mind can fully grasp. The face in the bark is not the face of a monster or a god. It is the face of the forest reflecting his own awareness back at him. It is a mirror. He steps forward and places his hand on the rough, warm bark of the great tree. He closes his eyes and just breathes with it, inhaling the scent of moss and earth and leaf mold, exhaling his own warm breath into the air. For a moment, the boundary between Alaric and the forest seems to dissolve. He is not a man in the woods. He is a piece of the woods that is for a short time a man. The folklore was the language he was given as a child to understand all this, a language of wights and spirits and rules. But through his own life, through fear and watchfulness and quiet respect, he has learned to understand the world directly. He doesn't need the stories to mediate his experience anymore. He has become fluent in the silent language of the woods itself. He has not conquered the forest. He has not debunked its mysteries. He has simply found his place within it. After a long time, he takes his hand from the tree turns and begins the walk home. His stride is different now from the one we saw at the beginning of our tale. It is not the cautious, hurried tread of a man anxious to get back to the safety of the fire. It is the calm, steady and peaceful walk of a man who knows he is already home. And so, Alaric's personal journey finds its peace. He has found his place in the world, but his story and the stories of Oakhaven are just one small thread in a vast and ancient tapestry. This same process of creating stories to explain the unexplainable, of drawing maps for the soul to navigate a world full of both beauty and terror, was happening in 1,000 different villages in 1,000 different valleys, all across the old world. These weren't just local superstitions. They were a fundamental part of the human experience, a shared technology for making sense of it all. And so, we pull back from Alaric and from the small, fragile circle of light that is Oakhaven. We let him fade back into the soft green of his forest, a single, quiet life that has found its peace. His story and the stories of his village were just one thread in a vast, ancient tapestry of belief that once covered the entire world. For centuries, this was how humanity experienced reality. The world was not a dead thing, a collection of resources to be measured and exploited. It was alive. It was intelligent. It was filled with agency and tension and an immense non-human consciousness. The stream could be angry. The mountain could be wise. The forest could watch you. And the folklore, the stories we've journeyed through, was the language they developed to speak with that world. It was a technology of the soul. Think about it. The story of the changeling was a heartbreakingly sophisticated tool for processing the unbearable grief of a child's illness or death. It gave the pain a narrative, a villain, and even a sliver of hope that the real child might one day return. The tale of the household brownie was a system for encouraging domestic harmony and diligence, a way of making a happy house a shared responsibility between the seen and the unseen. The the-wisp was a literal life-saving warning, a horror story designed to keep you on the solid path. The dread of the Barrow-wight was a powerful enforcement of respect for the dead and the sanctity of the past. And the wild hunt. The wild hunt was a myth that captured the sheer, untamable, terrifying power of a winter storm and gave it a face and a name, making the chaos of nature into a story you could survive by following the rules. These people lived inside their stories. The tales weren't a pastime. They were the very architecture of their reality, the map by which they navigated the mysteries of life, death, nature, and their own minds. They used these strange, beautiful, and sometimes terrifying beliefs to build a world that made sense, to give a voice to their fears, and to create a framework for hope. They did not have our science, our medicine, our electricity. But they had this, a shared, whispered understanding of the world that in its own way was just as powerful. It was the light of their fire against an immense and living darkness. But the fire has long since burned down. The world has changed. And from the quiet safety of our modern age, we can look back not with judgment, but with a kind of gentle wonder. And we can finally let these old spirits rest. And so, here you are, safe in your bed in a world that has been mapped, measured, and explained. The fire in Alaric's hearth went out 1,000 years ago. The great dark forest is gone, replaced by towns and cities and fields. There is no moss rock outside your door demanding your respect. There is no need to leave a bowl of milk out for a spirit in the walls. The only things that creak in your home are the familiar sounds of a house settling. No wild hunt rides the clouds above you, only the silent, distant passage of an airplane, a different kind of light in the night sky. The veil between the worlds is no longer thin. It is sealed and safe. The only spirits here are the quiet, gentle ones of your own, making the characters that will soon walk through your dreams. All the stories have been told. All the fears have been faced. Alaric has found his peace in the forest. Elara has found her peace with her child. The village of Oakhaven is quiet now, sleeping under a blanket of time. There is nothing left for you to do, nothing left to see. Let the figures and the forests of the past dissolve. Let them fade away, leaving only the gentle darkness of your room and the soft, steady rhythm of your own breathing. The world is quiet. All is well. Sleep now.